Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? First of all, I want to apologize. I was terrible at French at school. I was actually thrown out of French 2 years before the end of my school years. So I can speak very little French. So um, bear with me if your English isn't very good. I'll try and keep it clear and concise. Thank you. Okay. I'll start now if that's okay. Yeah? Okay. Oh, just as I said start, it's gone off. There we go. We're back. Okay. Well, today I just want to talk to you guys about my career so far. I will introduce myself properly in a moment, but the talk is about how things have changed. I think, in my perspective, over 37 years, I've kind of gone back to the beginning of the way I used to work, and this has happened over the last 5 years, and I'll explain in the coming presentation why that's worked for me. Okay. So we've just completed 2 Point Campus. It was actually meant to be released, I think, today, but we've moved it to August. The game's finished. We've gone through submission, but a few things we just wanted to do to improve performance across all platforms. So we've taken an extra 3 months. Really proud of the game. It's definitely something I think that isn't just a reskinning of something we've done previously with 2 Point Hospital. We've added way more features. You can now customize your campuses. You've got a long relationship system with your students, so you can nurture, care, develop their personalities, their relationships, that kind of thing. So the game's definitely a completely sort of step change. But because of obviously COVID and lockdown, it's really difficult to sort of land something as exactly as you would like when you're all working in the office together. But I thought I'd take you through what got us to where we are today as a group of people. Because actually I've worked with a lot of people over a lot of years, and that's been kind of the unique part of my career. So first of all, I will now introduce myself. I'm Gary Carr. I left art school with ambitions to move into film, TV, or animation. Back when I left college, I didn't really know about computer games. I grew up on BMX bikes and skateboards. There wasn't really home computers when I was a kid, so I wasn't even aware it was an industry. So I accidentally joined the games industry in 1986. I'll tell you about that in a moment. I was one of the original Bullfrog members. I think I was the 6th member of Bullfrog, a UK studio in the sort of 80s and 90s. And I've also founded 2 startups. First one was Mucky Foot in the late 90s, and 6 years ago I co-founded 2 Point Studios. So I kind of want to cover my game history to show you how it's kind of shaped me as a developer. And a lot's gone wrong, and some things have gone okay, and some things have gone really well. And that's that's just the rhythm of the world of games development. I think a lot of you may be in the same situation where some things you think are going to go really well don't, and some things you're not sure about go well for you. So I'll just give you a kind of my experience. And the games I've enjoyed making, because I've made a lot of games, but there are definitely types of games that I prefer making and I prefer playing. And there are things I think I can do better than other things, so I'll tell you why they sort of resonate with me. And why I think it's been a formula that's, for whatever reason, has worked better for me and been a success story for me. And finally, in our sort of talk, I'll get to the final act where some unfortunate circumstances enabled me, I think, in my studio to kick on and see some success in recent years. So, big disclaimer. I don't do many talks because I think sometimes the impression I think talks can do is give, this is what you should do. This is how games should be made, or this is how you should conduct things, and this is how things are done. And I don't think there's a way to do anything. I think it's what works for you. So whatever I say today, this is just what's worked for me and my colleagues. It doesn't make it the right way. And I would say, actually, this is a very unusual way to work in modern gaming because it's a very unstructured process, and it really does go back to an old way of working. But I am an old person, so I think that just works for me. So this is where we are today. This is probably a snapshot from 2 Point Campus around about 2 weeks ago. What we're trying to do is make the same charm, the same kind of unintimidating world we've done in previous games like 2 Point Hospital, in my previous sim games like Theme Hospital. Just I want it to feel like you want to play with the world, and it shouldn't feel intimidating, and it should feel like it's for everybody. A lot of sim games, I think, scare people off because there's lots of stats and there's lots of kind of buttons to press, and it feels very kind of techie. And we try and make our games to seem like anything could be touched and there's nothing you can do that's wrong. But this feels like we're getting to a place now where the game feels like it can go shoulder to shoulder against larger games. We've got the ability to completely change this world space. These buildings can be torn down and rebuilt the way you want them to be built. You don't have to. In 2 Point Hospital, we made you put things inside rooms that we built. Now you can go, I don't want your buildings, I want my buildings, so you can actually completely re-architect the whole game. So this feels like we're getting to kind of where I've always wanted to get with sim games. But I'll show you quickly. This is my career highlights, I guess. There's bits missing because it's not as relevant to this talk. But as I said, I started in '86 at a studio called Palace Software. Through the Bullfrog years, Muckyfoot, the studio I founded, that went bust. Lionhead picked me out of the water, struggling, and then after Lionhead, I formed 2 Point Studios. But let's go back to the beginning, and I'll just give you why I think this part of my career shaped me to some degree. So as I said, I accidentally got into games. I left art school with 4 films, amateur films I'd made. 2 of them were animated films. I'm an artist by sort of trade, I guess, an animator, and a storyteller. I used to sort of think I could sort of create ideas and tell stories through either film or animation. So I applied to a film company called Palace Films, and they used to be a big studio in the 80s. They made some really quite big films. The most famous film that you'll probably have heard of is When Harry Met Sally, but they were more known for their art house stuff, such as A Company of Wolves, My Beautiful Laundrette. They distributed things like the Evil Dead films. So they're a really cool film company, and I thought I'd got a job there. But they ended up putting me in their subsidiary games division, which for me, I had no idea about games as an industry. So when I got there, it was great because I got to do everything. I wasn't the tea boy. I wasn't running around trying to get a bigger role on a movie. I was told I could pretty much do what I wanted to do, just go and play with some computers and see if you can make a game. So at the time, the team was this big. It was a handful of people, and none of these people were game fans. They were also just plucked from creative industries. There were a couple of maths dudes who were smart guys, Andy, Stan, and Richard Leinfelder. They were kind of the smart maths dudes who'd played around with some computing at college, and the other guys were effectively artists. 2 of them were comic book artists. Dan Malone was a 2000 AD comic book artist, and myself and another guy who I haven't put on there because he left shortly after me. We were amateur filmmakers, so they were just trying to put creative people with smart programming people and see what came about. And also we had a lot of ownership of everything we put our game on. So this game I was going to talk about, we did in about 6 months, but each of those versions were owned and crafted and loved. We never ported anything. Everything was done from the ground up on those systems. So it was a lot of work for a small group of people. So the first game I released, with primarily the bunch at the top there on the left-hand side, that was the main creative group that made Barbarian. That young skinny bloke with beautiful thick dark hair, God, I wish I was him again, is me. And we basically made this game up because Steve, the guy in the middle with the sword, notice he has the biggest sword. He was fascinated by the sort of Conan the Barbarian movies, and that was all he said. He just said, "Let's make a Conan the Barbarian game." And there was very little else we put down on paper. We did some sketches. I remember drawing a lot of fight moves. We filmed ourselves copying the movie. And we wrote that would be cool. And then I think Highlander had just come out or was coming out with the movie, if you remember, where you remove heads. And we thought, hey, let's add that in as well. That would be cool. And that's about as detailed as we would get. We very rarely stuck to a design document. In fact, at that point in time, I don't remember anyone being called a designer. That wasn't a term we used. It was kind of, you're the artist, you're the programmer, we're all the creators of the game. So it was very collaborative. It was very inclusive. There was no hierarchy. It was like, wouldn't it be cool if? So that was the kind of way we worked back then. Obviously, it was a very early part of the industry, but it just made things flow. And that's how we enjoyed working. And the game came out on multiple, I don't know if this game was called, I know it did well in France, but was it called Barbarian in France? Does anybody even remember this game? You do? You're very old. Was it called Barbarian in France, or was it Death Sword in France? It was called Barbarian. Probably, yeah. Well, I'll be honest, I don't think this cover would work today. But for 14-year-old boys in the UK, this worked really, really well. So I don't know how much was down to the cover and the poster that came with it, or it was just, and it was quite brutal. It was a game that your parents would hate you playing because, so that was perfect for us. It was like, let's have a game where parents are shaking their head and saying, this is disgraceful. So that was the main premise behind that title. But it did really well. And I worked there for a number of years and enjoyed myself immensely. But then the film company got into trouble, and the money started to be taken from the games division and put into the film side to keep the film company going. And eventually, both pulled each other to the floor, and that fell apart. So then, I'd found out about a guy called Peter Molyneux who happened to live in the next town to me. He was about 5 minutes drive away, and I'd seen a magazine feature on a game he was working on called Populous. So I went to see him, and we got on really well, went out for a drink, and actually I don't remember ever being asked, but I just started working there. I just sort of kept meeting back up, and before I knew it, I was part of the team. And this isn't the team. Then I was the sixth member, but this was towards the end of my first spell at Bullfrog. And this team still is, these names are still really important in my life. Unfortunately, a couple of those people are no longer with us, but these were people that shaped a lot of my early thinking in different ways. And there are people on that list that I actually still work with. I mean, Alan works for me, Alan Wright. Mark Webley is my co-founder of 2 Point. And these are people, Mike Diskett and Guy Simmons, we've co-founded Mucky Foot together. We've formed long relationships over the years, which help us know how we think. And that collaboration is really, really important. I always sort of cross over to music, because I'm a big music fan. And to me, when I see collaborations with people who've worked together a number of years, like there'll be a session musician, guitarist that gets reused, or there's just people that just work well together. I think that's the same in games. If you can form long-term relationships with people, you just get the best out of each other, and you know what works, and it becomes less a paper trail of we had this meeting and we discussed this. It just becomes like what each other's. It's kind of a synergy between you all, and I think that's just really, really powerful. But again, we always built these games on systems. We never ported, we never outsourced, very rarely outsourced. And Mark Webley, for example, used to manage all these versions. So when we made something like a Powermonger, for example, all those versions I particularly worked on. So we would just start again and build out for that system. We always felt the end user was important. They were paying the same price for the game as somebody on, let's say we started on the Commodore Amiga, which at this time would have been probably the lead machine. We would then start again and make sure it was developed for PC or the Atari ST or some of these weird and wonderful machines that never really took off, like the Atari Jaguar and the 3DO. But back then, that rather angry young punk at the back was me. That was Bullfrog in probably 1989, roundabout. And Peter Molyneux is really rocking the double denim. That's a good look. But this was the studio. In fact, the guy next to me on the left, this is how small Bullfrog was at the time. He left because he wanted to find a girlfriend in America. So he left a company like Bullfrog. In fact, there was a guy before me who left because he wanted to be a postman. That's how little Bullfrog was at the time. But these were the games that this is when I fell in love with little people games or God games. Working on Populous and Powermonger, I suddenly felt like I had this kind of control over them, this kind of feeling of looking after or deploying or punishing, if you like. There was just this kind of weird power you have over these little creatures, and I just found that fascinating. Now, there were sim games around before or around about the same time, obviously, as these games were being made, but I think the phrase God game was definitely coined around the Bullfrog games because it was just a very different way we were trying to get you to feel about the creatures under your control. And whether it was something like a Powermonger where you were literally smiting your little people, or it was a theme park or a dungeon and you were a dungeon keeper, effectively it's the same kind of, even though they're very different games, it's definitely the same kind of feeling we were trying to get out of our games and from our experiences. So I was there for 4 years, and I enjoyed it immensely. But I kept getting opportunities to try a few different things. So at the moment, I didn't realize how lucky I was. I was making games I loved playing. You've got to remember, I was actually learning to love the games industry at this point. I wasn't a game fan. I'd never had games as a kid. I'd got to the arcades occasionally because I lived by the sea. But I was actually falling in love for the first time by making games. And obviously, when other opportunities and other game styles are presented, I just thought, oh, I'll go see if I like that even more. So I joined the Bitmap Brothers for a couple of years and realized, no, I don't enjoy other things. I really enjoy these little sim games more than anything. So I basically went back to Bullfrog in '95. And things had moved on a little bit because there'd been some success. Populous was huge, and through that success, there was opportunities to grow the studio. And when I came back, there were the same faces as before, but there were a lot of new smart kids who joined as well. And they weren't as well. They weren't game fans still. These were kids out of Cambridge University, and they were just smart maths students. And Peter had broken the company into 5 teams. And these 5 teams had a mixture of the new smart kids and the getting more experienced people like myself, kind of just at the sort of core of that, because obviously, we had to sort of impart our experience. But again, very rarely bigger than 10, maybe 15. Dungeon Keeper had the biggest team. That was about 15. My team on Theme Hospital was about 8. And what we did was we kept this kind of flat org. Still the term designer, the term producer was just non-existent. This was a policy of giving people an equal voice on a game so that you could collaborate. And it kept the team sizes tight, small, Yet within this studio, there were 5 teams all sitting shoulder to shoulder. I mean, I had the dungeon keepers. We had these sort of partitioned cubicles, and I could pop my head over, and there would be Peter and Mark Healy and the Simon Dean Carter making Dungeon Keeper, and there was Mark and myself and our team making Theme Hospital right next to each other. 2 very different games, but working shoulder to shoulder. So that experience and that kind of new, fresh thinking was always there. And it was organic. I mean, we always had a stem of an idea. Like Dungeon Keeper was always about being a dungeon master, really, and having little minions to do your work. But when we started Theme Hospital, the stem of the idea was we'll do a medical sim. And the game Mark and I started was actually played as we're going to really treat cancer, and we're going to deal with people who need amputations, and we're going to deliver babies. And we went to research all that and realized we're out of our depth. We don't know anything about medical science. Why are we even trying to simulate this? So we completely changed the game into this kind of made-up illnesses, made-up cures. But that's kind of what we would do on the fly. We wouldn't design that. We would just kind of feel the game has shifted and tilted in a different direction. And we would try those things out. The game was also meant to be over 4 time periods. And again, we suddenly sort of parked that idea, but we wouldn't write it all out and spend ages prototyping. And we kind of felt kind of instinctively to move away from those kind of ideas. So it kept it very lean, very quick. The process was organic, and the team wasn't too big. There was a lot of misinformation about why we're doing this now. It was all very clear. So yeah, documentation was kept to a bare minimum, and we let the ideas develop, and they came from everybody. But yeah, Mark and myself, I guess we curated those ideas. Someone has to basically make sure that we move on, and that was about it, really. It wasn't very kind of autocratic. It was very much like, actually, let's try this. Okay, right, great. And we kind of just slightly lightly steered the team along. But of course, in that time period, as I say, 5 studios, these games came out together pretty much. Out of a studio of about 50 people, we produced, maybe 60, we produced these games within weeks of each other. In fact, Gene Wars is a French team originally, and I was trying to think last night, I can't remember their original name, but they got acquired and brought into Bullfrog. But that's actually a French game up there. But this was how productive we were at that time, and you know, a lot of those games, in the UK at least, are still fondly remembered. In fact, even prior to that, when I was away, the studio was producing things as diverse as Syndicate and Theme Park. So you know, we had a very productive patch in the mid 90s. So then the thing was now, we'd all got to a point, I think, where the teams had gelled together really nicely. We'd formed kind of strong working relationships. And Bullfrog had been acquired by EA, and we weren't aware of this, but this was the coming new world of professional game development. We thought we were being overtaken by the Dark Lord of, you know, evil, but it wasn't true. I mean, they were just bringing more modern working practice to us, and I think we all got nervous, and a lot of the original teams paired up and left and did startups. But really, all EA were doing they were kind of showing us where the industry was going from a structural point of view, bringing producers, making us set up, you know, projected timeframes for the development process and risk analysis and all these kind of things that you guys probably do day to day in your development. We were not used to that. We were not used to being asked to stand up and prove what we were doing or why we're doing it this way. So we all kind of scattered and left. And Peter Molyneux and Mark Webley, my current business partner, they formed Lionhead, and myself and 3 other guys who were there, Guy Simmons, Mike Diskett, and Fimageki. We formed Mucky Foot Productions. Now, I'm starting to look a bit like Edge out of YouTube by this point in my career. But look at us, we thought we were really hard and tough. Yeah, right. But we founded the studio with, as I say, a bunch of the more senior devs. We had the same principles as Bullfrog. It was about a flat, productive, low documentation, make all the games ourselves rather than port the games out. Because if it had our name on it, it should be made by us rather than just make a version and then throw it to somebody, give them, whatever it costs and let them convert it. We built everything in-house. Again, we stayed highly productive by just minimizing the amount of paper trail, and we just spoke in an open plan studio with each other. We wanted to keep simulation as a core value as a studio. Startopia was our, if you like, our nod back to our history of making these games. But also we took on, as you do when you start your own company, because you're frightened where the next dollar's coming from, or pounds coming from, or euros coming from. You entertain taking on more things, and that was my first mistake as a head of a studio. Marvel knocked on our door pretty much and said, "You seem like a cool studio. Would you mind consider doing a Marvel movie game?" So we signed everything we could. Big mistake. We took on way too much stuff. And because of that, I had to move into more of a management role. In fact, the other core founders did as well. We started to have to deal with publishers. We had to prove what we were doing, how the money was being spent, show them lots of documentation, be outward facing, as they say in sort of business talk. And that was the first time I didn't make, I still did a lot on Startopia, but I didn't do anything on Urban Chaos, and I didn't do anything on Blade 2. So my analogy I make here is it's like you've got I'll go back to music again. It's like we're a band, and we have got fans out there who like what we're doing. So the management company said, "Hey, why don't you be more successful, bring more people in, and you manage them?" So we stopped doing the thing we were good at and moved into roles we were shit at. I mean, I'm not a manager. I'm not a very good strategist. My wife will confirm I can't hold a meeting. I can't stay on time for anything. I never look at my diary. So suddenly, a bunch of guys who are good at making games are now running a business, which seemed mad. And although our games were critically acclaimed and did pretty well from a kind of a fan base and from reviews and that kind of thing, they just didn't sell enough. And inevitably, after about 6.5 years, we had to close the studio, which is awful, because for the first time I'd hired people in my career. I'd become a manager. So I'm bringing people in who I adore, and I'm trying to we always hired people to become friends. That was just we used to take them down the pub and go, "This person's cool, we're probably going to enjoy, hanging out with them. They're quite talented as well, let's hire them." So when you've got 40 people who then, meet people, maybe get married, have kids, buy houses, and they're relying on you to find the money to support that, letting them go was absolutely devastating. So that was probably a real low in my life, that we closed the studio, which I thought was a fantastic, cool place to be. But Peter Molyneux and Mark Webley's studio, Lionhead, which started around about the same time, in fact we started a little before, they'd had the opposite. They'd had huge success with Black and White, and that had basically set them up in financial security for a lot longer than us. So they offered me a role, and my job was to come in and run Lionhead games, the Lionhead studio games, because back then, Lionhead was 3 studios. It was Lionhead Productions, and it was a company called Intrepid, and a company called Big Blue Box. So Lionhead was the parent company, and these were satellite studios. So they were like subsidiary companies. And Intrepid did a game called BC, and Big Blue Box did a game called Fable. And the black and white team was still there, doing black and white too. And my team was the movies. So I was put onto the kind of project that I was used to making, a little people game. So Mark Webley and myself ran this project. Peter ran the black and white project, and those other games were run by these little satellite studios. But Microsoft then acquired Lionhead after the success of Fable. So we had to sort of consolidate, this is what they wanted to do, all 3 studios into just Lionhead. So it got pulled back into one place. So we were now making Fable games. So even though Lionhead was effectively a rebadged version of Bullfrog, and Muckyfoot was a rebadged version of Bullfrog, I was now making Fable games, which was odd to me because I'm not an RPG guy, and I had no, real kind of experience in these games. And I didn't particularly. Fable's great, but it just wasn't my kind of game. I didn't have a lot of kind of anything to bring to that. So I just felt a little bit out of my comfort zone. So I was given, luckily, the opportunity to go and try and build something new. So I had a team of about 40 people, a lot of people, too many people, if I'm honest, to try and build some new IP for Lionhead, who were probably happy just to keep doing Fable at this point. Well, Microsoft certainly were. And we tried a few things. Again, we kept it very organic. But by now, that was difficult. By now, we were getting in a situation where we had to kind of prove our existence. 40, 50 people is a lot of people to just do what you want to do or try things out. So we were being challenged every 3 months on what are we producing, why are we doing this, let's test, let's do some user testing, let's get some customer sentiment tests done, and all this kind of stuff. This new world of development just seemed a little bit evasive to me, but we went through these processes of trying out these ideas, and the one on the left was a game idea called Survivors, where it was kind of a disaster sort of resource gathering and survivalist game. Again, the reason we closed that down was probably because it was a bit bleak and it didn't feel it had the charm of some of our previous games. Because even if we do things like you're a dungeon master, or it's got that comedy, that humor, that light touch, this felt a bit too. Didn't feel like it came from us. And then we went on and tried something. People think of it as Project Milo. It was actually called Milo and Kate. But Project Milo was a game which kind of blew up and then went away in about 5 minutes. But we were playing around with what was called Project Natal, which was potentially a new control mechanism. It ended up becoming Connect. But Peter's idea with my team, he just said, look, go and think about how we can make all our AI experience, where we've done lots of little characters who have all this kind of AI and ability to kind of have different emotions and traits. Let's just put it all into one single entity. So we're going to pour more, if you like, brain capacity into one character. And he wanted us to have an emotional connection. And that's about all he said about it. He just said, I just want you to care about this kid, because he's at that point in his life where he needs help. His parents are breaking up. He's been taken to move away as to restart his life. He's been torn away from his best friend, and he said to me, and he's going to die. And I was like, oh, great. And you're his imaginary friend. Effectively, he's just trying to sort things out in his head, and you're kind of the person trying to sort of, the little Jiminy Cricket on his shoulder, guiding him. And it was just a nice little idea, but it blew up so quickly into something when it was still just an idea that I think it just spun out of control, and people didn't know what it was going to be, and we didn't know what it was going to be. So there were questions like, when's it coming? And we went, we don't know. What kind of game is it? We don't know. Is it a game? We don't know. So Microsoft got really nervous. They thought, wow, this is just, nobody knows what they're doing here. Well, that's what we always did. We didn't know until we made it. And they closed that down. And that really made me sort of start to get really despondent about games, because I kind of felt that the planning and the proof points that were needed were just, not natural to me. I kind of thought we'd had quite a good career of making things without justification. And I appreciate games are more expensive than they used to be, but it just seemed to be constantly making it difficult for creative people to try and find something. There was just nothing organic about that process for me. So basically, I lost my team, and then it got merged into Fable, the Fable machine, the Fable factory. And ordinarily, I would have probably been fired, but because of my long history with the studio, I was given, if you like, another chance, and I called it the naughty step. And the naughty step lied in incubation, where I had a really small team of either misfits or very junior people. And we knew we were basically in the last chance saloon. And a couple of things I did was, there was a lot of things going on at this point. There was self-publishing, there was Steam. Steam had become a platform, and people were publishing things themselves, because things like Unity were virtually free for startups, and people could publish their own games without publishers telling them what to do and how to do it. And I was totally fascinated by that. So we tried to sort of tap into that energy that was going out there, and there were a lot of student games that were being published, and I kind of found out about that. And this is when I met Theo, actually, at Edgemin in Angoulême. We found really cool schools who were kind of encouraging students to own their IP and publish their own games. So I started to sort of come down to France and meet up, and I ended up being offered a mentorship program to sort of work with the students for their final year. And it was really kind of inspirational for me, because it reminded me of the energy of those small teams of 5 or 6 people, all working together organically, all jumping in onto different roles and wearing different hats. Somebody would be kind of more organizational based, so they may kind of do a little bit of kind of structuring the team. Everyone helped out each other, and shit got done. And I was really kind of inspired by that. So I would go back to my incubation team and said, look, let's just, and this was a phrase I used to hate, but it's of its time, but that fail fast, fail often approach. We just made lots of little games really quickly. We probably gave a game 2 weeks, throw it away. If it was promising, maybe another week, maybe another 2 weeks, but that was it. And these guys on the right-hand side, the reason I put them in the picture is, the guy at the bottom co-founded, there's 3 founders of 2 Point Studios. He's one of them. And he was a fairly junior guy when I hired him, but he was a big fan of old Bullfrog games, and he knew more about them than me, and he was a really smart programmer. The guy at the top, he was about the most junior person in the world, but he had that same look in his eye that I remember a lot of my friends having, the early games people I worked with. And he was arrogant, and he was opinionated, and I loved him a bit. So I kept him at 2 Point as well. I brought him over with me. And the guy in the middle, he came up with this idea here called Inquest, and that came about because I used to run something called Lionhead Creative Day. So when I had this little team, I used to have to try and make myself seem more important, and I used to book out an auditorium just like this. I gave the whole of Lionhead, which was about 500 people at the time, 2.5 days off. I took advantage of being on the leadership team. And on those 2.5 days, they could form little teams. So it didn't matter if you ran reception or you were the person who was in finance, or you were the HR manager, or you were the COO, or you were the most junior person. You all had 2.5 days to try and find people to work with and maybe present a game. And if you got the game done, we would book a theatre like this out, and we would have a day of showing those games to the studio. And that meant everybody, in my view, could be a game developer, because when you go into the business, you don't go into the business to sort of be someone who just does the spur or the shield or the sword or the knight and just do lots and lots of little things, which is what happens in the industry now. If you work on these great games as they are, if you work on an Assassin's Creed, you may just be the person who builds rocks, or you're the person who does the tiling on a roof and all the variants. And I kind of think it's a bit of a shame that's now how big it's become. So we wanted to give everybody an opportunity to create something, whether it's the idea, whether it's you write the music for it, whether you do the concept drawings. But everybody who thinks they've got something to play, some part to play, can join a team and get involved and make something, and we could show it off to the studio and celebrate it. So this was an idea that Johnny in the middle there, who, as I say, he's now founded Glowmade, he came up with Inquest. So we put it into incubation and we made it and we released it. And this suddenly inspired me that I started, ooh, that was me. How do I do that? How did I do that? Surely I don't have the power to turn it off. Right, okay. So I jumped in and started building this game. I had to learn Unity. I started to sort of build the maps, and everyone else was involved. How long have I got, Joseph? How long have I got? 5 minutes. Okay, I can get there. So I suddenly realized I was making games again, albeit a small little charming thing like this, which is a little picture book kind of branching puzzle story. I was making it again. I wasn't managing people making it. I was back in the saddle making a game. And that just made me excited again for this is what I should be doing. So I took these two guys and I contacted, here it comes, this guy, Mark Webley, the guy who had made those early Bullfrog games with me, the guy who co-designed Theme Hospital with me. He'd retired at this point. He was about 52 then, it's about 6 years ago. He'd obviously co-founded Lionhead. He was okay for money. He wasn't in any kind of financial, he'd gone into sort of this casual semi-retirement. He did a bit of consulting. He helped people out, he'd attend certain game events, but he was in this kind of nice, quieter phase of his life. And I was desperate now to go make games, not build a studio. That wasn't important. It was just make a game where we make it, where I'm an artist, animator, designer again, and he's a programmer, designer again. So I contacted him, and he thought I was crazy. And I just said, look, I've found a smart couple of kids who I've got talent and passion, and we should just go and self-publish a game like we used to make. I considered, crowdfunding, although I got really scared quickly because I don't really understand crowdfunding. It just sounds like horrendous. So I basically put a proposal together with Mark, and we got in a car and we drove around small publishers. We went to the north of England. We went to see people and bigger publishers like Team 17, and we got to see if there was any interest in what we wanted to do. So we founded the studio in 2016, and my aim was to just get a game out, just one more time, make a game where I've made it with a small group of people and make it the way we used to make it, without lots of documentation, without someone in charge, without being overly produced, without having every answer to every question at the beginning. Let's go through this wonderful journey, because why should you have every answer at the very beginning? Why can that come to you as you go through the kind of process of development? So we had Mark and myself. We started working on this. We had Ben, in the wings because he obviously needed to carry on working, so he couldn't join, leave his company and get in a car with us and drive around convincing publishers to back us. So we let him sort of carry on working while we kick things off. But we wanted it to have the same studio values as we remembered at Bullfrog and we had at Muckyfoot, and even Lionhead in the early days before acquisition, which was, to make crafted games and also to have, empowered creativity. Nobody should be absolutely dictatorial. No one should be telling other people that they know better. And everyone has a voice, and we all sit together, and it's just curated by somebody, and that would be me and Mark. We will just make sure that, we get to a conclusion, we get to a resolution, and that should be our only kind of hierarchical approach. So when we started making our early prototype, and in a really serendipitous way, we were kind of approached by Sega through a friend of a friend, because they were looking for a Bullfrog type project, and we were making a Bullfrog type project, and they just sort of couldn't believe how kind of coincidental this was. So they were immediately supportive, and they were immediately saying, look, we know you're not ready to make it yet, we know you haven't got your team in place yet, but let's just go and make this game. And as we were working out sort of our terms sheet, our agreement of how they were going to work and how we were going to work, I got a phone call. I've got about 2 minutes, yeah? 3 minutes? And this phone call just kept coming in. I couldn't take the call because we were talking to the lawyers at Sega about signing a contract, and I kept sort of, cancelling the call, and it kept coming back in. And I thought, this is Mark Smart, the guy who used to work with me at Muckyfoot, and I'd worked with for years at Lionhead. And he said, I took the call. I said, sorry, guys, I've just got to leave the room a second. And he told me that Lionhead had just been closed that morning with no warning to anybody. It was literally the staff, the management team. They'd just been basically dragged down into the main vestibule area of the studio, and they were told the studio's closed. So suddenly, I had all those fantastic Bullfrog stroke Lionhead people available to me, which was great because I had no idea how I was going to get a team together. So I was able to pull in wonderful, experienced people I'd made Theme Park with, Theme Hospital with, people that had made Dungeon Keeper, people that had made Fable games, people that had made, Syndicate and Magic Carpet and Powermongers. All these people that I'd worked with all these years had become available. So what Mark and I did was we diluted the company down, brought these people in, because I couldn't pay them very much at all, and we made them shareholders in our studio, and we basically said, look, we're all bosses together, we're all going to make a percentage of either nothing or something. And we made the game in less than 2 years. Again, not a huge amount of documentation, that's what we were used to doing, not a huge amount of structure. We did document a bit more than we used to do, but we did it more like a captain's log, if you like. We would write down anything that was currently being considered, and that became a kind of a diary rather than a document. And in the end, it is a document. At the end, it's a fully fledged design document, but it's more a log of what we're thinking. And now, bringing us up to date-ish, we launched the game. Our expectations was it might get some positive press because it was a nostalgia play. It was definitely trying to be something that was appealing to people who used to like the games we used to make. But it just blew up massively, and we've now had over 5 million users, which is nuts. That's more than Fable games. I didn't do that. Is it gone? Oh, we're there. We're good. And to close quickly, just to get us to right up to speed, it allowed us to do more than one game, which was always my plan. Just do one game and then go and retire. I'm an old man. I'll go and, go fishing or, live in a shed making things. But it's done so well that we've now got into a situation where we still kept the studio small. It's probably about 40 people. But the reason it's 40 and not, by the way, it was 12 people that made 2 Point Hospital. The reason we have 40 now is that ethos we always wanted is to deliver to each platform with a dedicated team. And we wanted to deliver at the same time, because one of the things we couldn't do with Hospital was deliver to consoles at the same time as we delivered to PC. But now we're delivering across all these platforms, physical and digital, where you know, like Switch physical and digital and console physical digital. They're all coming day and date at the same time, and they've all got their own dedicated team that have delivered those titles. And they all have their own control system that works for them. So obviously Switch is very different to PC. So we've made sure that it's had exactly the same love. So if you buy it on Switch, it should feel dedicated. So we're really proud of doing this game, especially through a global pandemic where we've all had to learn how to work from home and work in our underpants and things like that. But we're there, and the game is coming in August. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. And if there's any questions, I will happily... Oh, thank you. I'm not used to a round of applause.
Thank you, Gary. Do you have any question? Avez-vous des questions? Je pense qu'il faudra les poser en anglais. J'ai pas vu.
I'll go first because the other person doesn't have the mic yet. So just to follow up on on what you were saying about the pandemic, did you encounter any challenges in maintaining the way you were working, which I guess is very much based on also physical proximity, in the fact that everyone was viewing everyone else through a screen, and how maybe did you adapt to preserve some of that process?
Great question. I need to credit one person in our studio more than any other, and she was the real star of the project. You're absolutely right. Everything I've been telling you is about working together in a team, being close, feeding off each other's energy, and that's totally impossible on Zoom or whatever different video system you're using. But Jo Kulia, she was the kind of team leader that took over. She kind of made sure everybody communicated, and it is not as good, it's not as easy, and it did make us take a little longer over things, but she just took upon herself to own the communication channel, and she was just working relentlessly across all the different little scrum teams and all the little divisions of the, you know, whether it was an art huddle or whether there was a little programming meeting or a design meeting, she would go, oh, I need you to now speak to these people because that's interesting, because they're talking about something that's not quite the same. Let's just get you guys together. And all she did was constantly, you know, connect people. Now, without her, I don't think we would have got done for another year. So, you know, and that wasn't something we particularly put in place. She just, again, everybody feels they can take the lead or take a role. No one's waiting to be told what to do. That's the only thing I'd say that we managed to, if you like, we enable people. But she did such a fantastic job. Without her, this project would not be ready for such a long time. So that was the solution for us. But again, you're right. There's no rules on how you do this because no one expected us to be in this situation for so long. But thanks to her, I think we managed to get the game done. And the quality, I'm a real critic of our games. I play them all to completion. I've played Campus all the way through to completion, and it's a better game than Hospital. And that's just amazing considering we've done it in lockdown. So, but thanks for the question. That's great. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you have a few tips for a team that is doing its first sim game?
Right, okay. I hope.
Like in design, or I don't know, something that you really think for a sim game is really important to do?
Well, play it constantly. Be your own critic. Get your friends involved, people that aren't necessarily developers, because the thing about sim games is they have to be accessible. They have to be. Because quite often everyone can come up with a good game, but it's how they kind of get that user experience right. And it's really difficult. That's the hardest part, the user experience. So don't assume that just because you've put a button over here, everyone else is going to work that out. Don't assume that the information that's in there is enough. You have to basically. I think the best sim games are very, very broad in what they're trying to do. They come across as very casual, but they're actually very deep as well. There's a lot of deeper systems. So a casual player will get something out of it. But if they want to really get into the systems and they really want to kind of complete and get all the kind of achievements the game has got to offer, there's something for them too. And I think Theme Hospital did that really well. I know people that have played Theme Hospital who've never played any other game. It's like, someone's nan really liked playing it. And yeah, I know people who play sim and they say it's pretty hardcore because some of the achievements are really, really difficult to get. So I would say always try and make something that has a broad appeal, because you need to have as wide a kind of entry level to sim games as possible. But then you kind of sucker people into not realizing it, but they're getting really core because the systems are there. That's probably not the best advice. It's just the first thing that came into my head. But yeah, just keep playing your own game. Just absolutely play it and play it and play it, because that's the most important thing. You've got and be really critical on yourself. Really, argue that it could be better all the time. Just keep playing and playing and playing your own game. So many developers don't play their own games. It's crazy. We used to make everybody on Friday just play our game. Let's just see what we think of it. Don't just be the guy building the asset. Go and play it. It's your game. But thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Are we good? Oh.
Thank you for your conference. What an amazing career. Amazing job. You mentioned earlier that you worked at Bitmap Brothers Studio.
Yeah.
On which game did you work?
I did Chaos Engine 2. Dan Malone, who worked with me at Palace Software, he was the genius who did Speedball 2, Chaos Engine 1. He was a fantastic artist. I'm not fit to tie his shoelaces. He could make pixels disappear. He could make colors that the game didn't support appear. He was just a genius. But he wanted to go and take a sabbatical. So he asked me if I would step in for him. And he wanted to go to India and find himself for a year and a half. So I just made the sequel. And it's not a very good sequel to a very, very good game. It wasn't the best time for me. I love the company, but the game wasn't suited to my skills, and I could see I wasn't doing as good a job as Dan. If you're stepping into, it's like if a band has a singer who's got a bad throat, so someone steps in and does the tour and they can't sing as well. You kind of, I knew I wasn't doing as good a job, so I basically went back to Bullfrog, doing things I'm better suited to.
Okay, that was my question. Why did you left the company?
Yeah, no animosity, no problem. And they were friends. And I'd done work for them before. I'd done some. I did the Sega 8-bit version of Xenon 2. I converted the art to go on the platform, and I'd done a few bits and pieces. But I just knew I wasn't the best person. When you're not the right person for the role. So I just had a conversation and said, I think, thank you for the opportunity, but I think I'm better going back to sim games. That's what I do better.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your talk. It's more a statement than a question, really. But I really loved the Sim Park and Sim Hospital games. They're really dear to me, and they're really great sim games. But what kept me in those games was those little jokes, this little humor you got from time to time, and you go from one joke to another, you search for them, and you see in little details the game didn't tell you, and when when you see them, you're rewarded as I see this new thing, this new humor, this new joke, and you tell about it about your friend. Did you see that? It was really funny, and this is what I really love in those games. This bullfrog type of game, and what I miss sometimes in other sim game. Really, social,
I agree.
hidden gems,
The humor is so important to us. The writers at Bullfrog, it was James Leach on Theme Hospital, for example, and it's a guy called Harry who we brought in to work with us on 2 Point games, and we worked with James as well. And James did Startopia with me as well. So we have this. We've always reused a lot of people who we feel know their craft. So we don't have to handhold, and James did a really great job on Theme Hospital. And it's the long play gag as well, where you've played the game and you get the punchline probably 5 hours later down the line, because we seed a little joke or a little, idea of something, and then the writing pays off later on. Writing is just as important to us as anything else in the game. It does so much heavy lifting in game development. If you've got a good writer, you remember things that aren't really in the game. It's just a line. But you think, oh, the game's great because you could do this, this, and this. You probably can't do it, but the writing puts it in your mind. So writing's very, very important. If any of you guys are building games right now, if you can find somebody who can just make magic come off the page, then that is just gold. So thanks for that. And humor's a great way of disarming a player. If you bring humor into a game, it makes you feel like it takes that sense of intimidation with a lot of systems away. So we use humor to make the game seem fun and friendly, and I think it makes you stay with the game for longer. So yeah, thanks for picking up on that. That's right. Writing is very key. And that's why I said earlier, that's why the Survivor game we put down, because we couldn't think of a way of bringing that charm into that idea. Other people can do that. There are better studios than us to sort of lock you in with, I don't know, really kind of good, thrilling writing. But that's just not our expertise. We're better at doing, dad jokes.
Thank you very much. That's the end of the session. So thank you very much, Gary, for the talk. And thank you all.